before I introduce our speaker, I first want to acknowledge that wherever you're calling in from, and it seems like quite a varied amount of places, wherever you're calling in from, you are on Indigenous land. At MOHAI, we're on the historic and contemporary lands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and all Coast Salish people. Historically, Native communities were forcibly removed from the city, but today we honor their continued endurance with deep respect and gratitude for their unbroken stewardship of this place. And we encourage you to visit the websites of local tribes to learn more about whose land you're on. And we'll also put the link nativeland.ca so that if you're not from the Seattle area, you can look up what are the local tribes. So now I have the pleasure of introducing Michael Adams. And Dr. Michael Adams is the son of the photographer Ansel Adams and worked closely with his father for many years and continues to play an active role in preserving the work and legacy of his father. Dr. Adams is a retired internist, retired Major General in the Air National Guard / USAF, and chairman of the board at the Ansel Adams Galleries in Monterey and Yosemite. And we are just beyond honored to have him here today. So I'm going to turn the mic over, as it were, and then I'll come back for the Q&A portion. And thank you so much, Michael, for being here with us.
Thank you, Rachel. You can hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, I'm very pleased to be here with you this evening, and I want to share with you some of Ansel's early work. You have at MOHAI an exhibit of Ansel's work entitled A Museum Set. I think of around 50 images. You'll see some of those same images in what I show tonight, but I hope you see a lot more and some more unique thing. I want to also talk a little bit some of my experiences with Ansel. And I want to thank my wife, Jean, who helped me put together the talk, did quite a bit of research on Ansel Adams correspondence and has really helped in putting these programs together. Ansel created images that people respond to emotionally. These photographs define our perception of nature and the unique American ideal. I get the right. The ideal characterized in our national parks and other lands protected for posterity. Ansel epitomized civility, generosity of spirit. He was an original, an innovator, a teacher, a conservationist, a mountaineer, a writer of more than 30 books, a talented artist who shared his profound respect and joy through his personal interpretation. His art and perfection to craft continue to inspire people throughout the world today. Ansel's sense of place was evident. The Pacific Ocean, in the San Francisco area, and then later in the Big Sur coast, the mountains of California, Yosemite, and the Sierra Nevada, and the Southwest. Ansel was born in 1902 in San Francisco, and this is the home he grew up in. This was in 1903. This is outside the Golden Gate, west of the Golden Gate. And this is the area now known as Seacliff, where you're looking across the Golden Gate to the Marin Hills in the distance there. His playground was these sand dunes, and it was kind of a unique area. This is Baker Beach and the Presidio on the right. Again, this is well before the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge. His parents were elderly, and he was somewhat of a precocious, hyperactive child who had it been today, probably would have been on Ritalin. But he had a great deal of difficulty in formal school settings. He was taken out of school on several occasions and tutored in French, Greek, and math. And in 1915, he was taken out of school for the year, given a season pass to the Panama Pacific International Exposition, which was celebrating the opening of the Panama Canal. He went almost daily, using streetcars primarily to get there. And he was exposed to modern painting, sculpture, architecture, exhibits of science and machinery. There were things that he could get his hands on. There was also music and of various kinds. And it was a year-long experience. It was quite amazing. He finished the 8th grade at Miss Kate Wilkins Grammar School, thus ending his formal education. He later received honorary doctorates of fine arts from the University of California at Berkeley, Harvard, Yale, the University of Massachusetts, University of Arizona, Mills College, and Occidental College. He was very honored to receive this recognition, but he always reminded everyone that he really had only graduated from the 8th grade. Ansel also continued the practice of the piano with an emphasis at discipline, the practice, the precision technique, and expressiveness, which carried over into his photographic years. And he frequently, in later years, used musical analogies, saying when we think of the negative as the score and the print as the performance. That was speaking about the piano. He fully intended to become a concert pianist, and that was going to be his life's work. It was a major part of his early life. And I have a letter that, if I could find it. Anyways, his wife-to-be, my mother, got a letter from him from San Francisco saying that he couldn't give up the piano. When in later years, he would continue to do his photography, but it would become a habit, sort of a hobby rather than a full-time life. In any event, in 1916, he was ill, and his aunt gave him a book entitled In the Heart of the Sierras by a James Hutchings, written in 1886. It got him excited about Yosemite, and he convinced his parents that that's where they should vacation. He was 14 years old in 1916, and off they went. Now, he was given the box brownie, and he did what usual tourists do and new visitors to Yosemite is they went all around the valley, especially, and took pictures of the major sites. That experience in June of that year was such, he returned every year of his life thereafter. In 1917, he met a fellow named, this was the family that first year in 1916. I include some of these early photographs. This was 1920, but to show you that his eye, even at an early age, before he even considered photography as a career, he had an eye for a quality photograph. He knew what to take and where to take it. This one is included not because it's a very good picture, but when he would take the roll of film in to have it developed, the guy came and asked Ansel, is something funny on this roll? All the negatives are upright except this one. How do you explain that? And Ansel said, well, you know, I must have clicked the shutter when I fall off that stump. So this picture may have been taken up when he was upside down falling. But in any event, it's sort of an interesting image. Frank Holman is a fellow he met in 1917, who was a retired engineer and an amateur ornithologist, but he was also an expert at camping. And Ansel used to say minimalist camping in the backcountry. He also taught Ansel how to pack burros. And in the next, for the next few years, Ansel was able to get a job for 4 summers as the custodian of this LeConte Memorial Lodge. And he traveled with Frank Holman, who we called later Uncle Frank. He called Uncle Frank, but he had to have a burro one year, and he had to write. Had to write his father to get the money to buy this burro. He needed it to carry his cameras, plus his bedding and food. And in those days, he was using glass plates. So the weight was significant in trying to take a camera and photographic equipment with you. But here's the letter he wrote to Virginia, my mom, in 1923. He said, I'm now doing a little teaching piano, most excellent. It will help me my getting established, but it's a beginning and brings us closer to the happy day. I will continue my photographic work as a means of incidental income until I find my music is filling my time. Thereafter, photography will become a hobby only. I cannot let anything interfere with my music. Now, Ansel needed a place to practice the piano in the summer, and a ranger friend of his said, I know what you need. I have an answer. And he introduced Ansel to Harry Best, who had a daughter, Virginia, who is here in this picture, who is also my mother. But it was a sort of an on-again, off-again courtship. They eventually married in January of 28. But one thing I want to point out, my mother, Virginia Best Adams, is rarely discussed in most of the articles on Ansel, but she was very, very important. And she was a climber herself. She was a rock climber. She has a number of first ascents in the Southern Sierra. She and Ansel were quite compatible, went on many, many day trips and camping trips together over the years. But her father, Harry Best, had this studio gallery where Ansel could sell some of his pictures even at a fairly early age. When he died in 1936, my mother was the recipient of whatever the gallery owned at that time. And this gave them, they were married, had been married in 28. This gave them an income and a place to live in Yosemite Valley, which allowed Ansel a great deal of freedom in his work. He had funds and a roof over his head all these years when he was doing his photography, where he could spend time in Yosemite and do more creative work rather than have to search for commercial work. So it was a tremendous advantage. Also, my mother published a number of books about Ansel, in Ansel's, one of them entitled My Camera in Yosemite Valley, another My Camera in the National Park, and she published a book for Edward Weston, another photographer, on My Camera in Point Lobos. And the things she brought to the marriage and to the opportunity, especially the opportunity to live in Yosemite, was a huge advantage for them. Now, in 1927, Ansel, Virginia, and a couple of three other friends, everybody was a photographer, climbed up to what's called the diving board, where the arrow is, up on the LeConte Gully, which is down on the right side and up over this ridge. There was a lot of snow still. You can see them here in it. This is called the diving board. That's, you can sort of see how steep it is. And then the movie that you're going to see was taken by my mother, 16 millimeter, and later digitized. The playing is Ansel, recorded in about 1945 on the East Coast, and it was dubbed for this. So you'll enjoy 2.5 minutes. That's my mother. With his next to last glass plate, this was the picture that was taken. Using a yellow filter, a K2 yellow filter, and Ansel realized at the time that that was not going to give him what he wanted to achieve, so he switched to a red filter. And this is the result, considerably different, but Ansel said later that this is probably the photograph that convinced him that he knew what he was doing, he knew how to get there, and photography may be sort of his career. And this one he entitled Monolith, the Face of Half Dome, was very important in that. Sierra Nevada and the John Muir Trail. Ansel's, like I mentioned, spent summers in Yosemite or somewhere else in the Sierra Nevada. And it offered an opportunity to travel with the Sierra Club throughout this area. In 2 years, he spent some time, 26 and 27, with the LeConte family in Kings River Canyon, which was very important because the Sierra Club board asked him several years later to take his photographs of this particular area, the Kings River Canyon, back to Washington and show congressmen and representatives what the area really looked like. And a number of these were all from that particular area. They were pushing at the time to make Kings Canyon a national park. And in 1940, President Roosevelt signed a bill making Kings Canyon a national park. There was a book entitled Sierra Nevada and the Jarman Trail that Ansel did with a great deal of support from friends in San Francisco. A copy was given to Harold Ickes, who was the Secretary of the Interior at the time, who in turn gave it to President Roosevelt, who wouldn't give it back and had to come back to Ansel and request a second copy, which he graciously did. But Ansel was a director of the Sierra Club for 30-something years, and he had opportunities not only to see many of these places, he wrote about them. He included the photographs in books of the area, and he lectured. And he was very much involved through the Sierra Club at that time with the environmental movement, although he said he never went to take a picture specifically for the environmental purposes. However, he was always generous with his photographs in that respect. The burro became a very important part of his life in the summers, of getting his cameras into the backcountry. He taught me and my sister about packing burros, and I had the opportunity to take my wife and later kids into the Sierra with burros. They're just a wonderful animal, friendly and easy to live with. And you don't have to take any feed for them. They can take care of themselves. All you need to do is find some grass for them. But to carry the glass plates and the food, the camera, and all of the equipment you need to go out for a week or two, they were just wonderful for that. In 1938, I mentioned he published the Sierra Nevada and the Jarman Trail. Interestingly, it was to celebrate a fellow Walter Starr Jr. who was lost climbing in the minarets. His Walter Starr's father wanted to do something to celebrate his son's life, and this book was a spectacular edition for that. They only printed 500 copies initially. That's the one I mentioned he gave to the Secretary of the Interior, who then gave it to President Roosevelt. But many of these photographs that I'm showing you now were taken with glass plates and are fairly early. The second area that Ansel loved and spent a lot of time in is the Southwest. And through this gentleman, Albert Bender, who was an insurance man in San Francisco, but really a sponsor of Ansel's work in several ways. Albert had a car, but he didn't drive, and he would ask Ansel to drive him somewhere. And one trip in 1927 was to the Southwest, where Ansel met people like Mary Austin in Santa Fe and Whitter Binner, a poet, met Paul Strand, John Marin, the painter. But out of that first trip, when he met Mary Austin, they agreed to collaborate on a book on Taos Pueblo. It was printed, published in 1930. And these are some of the photographs from the book. Ansel is not known well for his portraits, but he made some very spectacular ones. Albert Bender was very supportive of Ansel and helped publish his first portfolio in 1927. And then the several books thereafter. Now, I was lucky enough to go with Ansel and friend Cedric Wright to the Southwest in 1941. I was taken out of school and all of us got into that station wagon, including all of that material, boxes and what have you, that's on the blacktop there outside the car. But for me, what an exciting thing. We were planning to go about 3 to 4 weeks and end up about 6 weeks because I had an appendicitis in New Mexico. But places like Zion National Park, Bryce Canyon, we got stuck in Butler Wash, Utah. I remember it very well. We thought we might lose the car. The water was coming up by about the time the truck got there to tow us out. But these are pretty exciting for a 7-year-old. Mesa Verde was also a pretty exciting place. The Grand Canyon, White House Ruin and Canyon de Chelly. This was very exciting for me. The trader at Canyon de Chelly was a guy named Cozy McSparron. And he had I don't know what year it was, but he had a big 4-door Lincoln convertible with oversized tires. And off we'd go up the canyon. He did this for his guests at the lodge he had. He had the little hotel called the Thunderbird Lodge. He said there's quicksand and I get stuck every now and then, but I go find a couple of my friendly Navajos who bring their horses and pull me out. But pretty exciting to do that. Walpi was an interesting place. We had to get permission of the governor of Walpi to park our car up there overnight so Ansel will get up at the crack of dawn and get early photographs. Now, Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico is Ansel's most famous photograph, and it was taken on that trip that we were on. I want to show you a couple of things. This is the photograph, Moonrise Hernandez, which is Ansel's most famous, taken in 1941. But the magic of this photograph was what could be done in the darkroom. And I want to show you, this is what's called a straight print. This has no manipulation in the darkroom. It's not very exciting. And especially on this one, he took the one picture and before he could take a second photograph, the sun was all gone from the foreground. So there's only one negative of this particular image. And he said it was very difficult to print, but what he could do in the darkroom, watch the sky and watch the foreground. This is his magic, the burning and the dodging, the intensity of a light in certain areas that he could control in the darkroom made it something special. This is his instructions to himself in 1980, what he needed to do during the process of the burning and dodging, how much time is given this thing. And the problem was for many years, he would get 2 or 3 orders or maybe a dozen orders and then go in the darkroom. It'd take him a half a day to get the photograph to what he accepted as the final and quality exhibit. But he had to do this each time because he had been doing them months apart. In 74, his business manager said, this is it. Where as of December 31st, 1974, you're not going to take any more orders for fine prints. And it took him 3 years finally to print the orders that had come in for the various prints that he made. But it took a great deal of pressure off him that he wasn't thinking that he was going to have to do this particular image every 6 months and take the time to set up. Here again is the straight print notice the clouds in the sky, the moon and the clouds over the mountains, and then especially the foreground. And there's the final print. And it's an amazing image. Like I said, there's only one negative of this. We think there's somewhere, he printed somewhere around 4,000 of this. We don't know for sure. But anyway, it's his most successful image. Now, in 1943, Ansel was too old to join the military, and he did some photographic work with the military and teaching. But a friend of his by the name of Ralph Merritt, who was running Manzanar, the relocation camp for Japanese Americans over on the east side of the Sierra. And Ralph Merritt asked Ansel to come over and take a look of maybe doing some kind of a documentary on this. He went over, he made 4 trips to Manzanar in 43 and 44. I went with him on 2. Some of the most well-known pictures that Ansel took and produced were made on those trips to the east side, and I'll show you another. But this is one entitled Winter Sunrise. But this is Manzanar. This, in 1942, President Roosevelt created I can't think of this, 1066, I believe the term, the number was, but it was a law that incarcerated American citizens of Japanese descent. And these were people were disrupted from their lives and their careers. And there were a number of people that Ansel knew, friends, that lost a lot in that. But anyway, it was interesting for me to go over there. Ansel did this book on Manzanar. He made an exhibit entitled Born Free and Equal, and he produced a book entitled Born Free and Equal. And his comments about this, he said, moved by the human story unfolding in the encirclement of desert and the mountains, and by the wish to identify my photography in some way with the tragic moment of the times, I came to Manzanar with my cameras in the fall of 1943. I believe that the acrid splendor of the desert, ringed with towering mountains, has strengthened the spirit of the people of Manzanar. I do not say all are conscious of this influence, but I'm sure most have responded in one way or another to the resonances of their environment. From the harsh soil, they have extracted fine crops. They have made gardens grow in the fire breaks and between the barracks, out of the jostling, dusty confusion of the first bleak days in raw barracks. They have modulated to a democratic internal society and praiseworthy personal adjustment of conditions beyond their control. The huge vistas and the stern realities of sun and wind and space symbolize the immensity and opportunity of America, perhaps a vital reassurance following the experience of enforced exodus. This is one of the few monuments there in Manzanar that is still present today. It is now a National Historical Site. My son and I were over there about 2 years ago at this very site, and a van drove up. It was full of Japanese nationals who had come to America. They'd read about Manzanar, they'd heard about it, and they had gotten a van and driven up for the day from Los Angeles to see this. Anyway, if you have a chance, it's just north of Lone Pine, California, and it's a spectacular site. They've done a very good job of the history, of making the history available to the public if you go there. Again, this is another photograph that Ansel did at that time that he thought a lot of, and from that Manzanar experience. Now, I mentioned before, Ansel said that he never once went out to take a photograph for a conservation cause, but he was always generous with his photographs for conservation and environmental projects. And in 1940, he was appointed by the Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ickes, to make photographs of murals for the National Park Service of national parks and monuments to be displayed in the Department of Interior building. This project ended with World War II starting in 1941. But Ansel continued the idea when he had an opportunity over the next few years, and he applied for a Guggenheim Fellowship in 46. He got 2 Guggenheim Fellowships to continue that project. And out of that came portfolios of photographs and books. And in 1950, he published Portfolio 2 entitled The National Parks and Monuments. And he wrote in that, the national parks are indeed phenomena of an advanced society. James Bryce once said that the concept of the national parks was America's unique contribution to the democratic idea. The national parks represent those intangible values which cannot be turned directly to profit or natural material advantage, and it requires integrity of vision and purpose to consider such impalpable qualities on the same effective level as material resources. Yet everyone must realize that the continued existence of the national parks and all they represent depends upon awareness of the importance of 3 basic values: the pressure of growing population, self-interest, and the shortness of vision are now the greatest enemies of the national park idea. And Ansel wrote that dragons of demand have been kept at snarling distances by the St. Georges of conservation, but the menace remains. Only education can enlighten our people, education and the accompanying interpretation, and the seeking of resonances of understanding in the contemplation of nature. Our time is short and the future terrifying long. Believing as we must that the things of the heart and mind are most enduring, this is the opportunity to apply art as a potent instrument of revelation, expression, and perpetuation of wilderness actualities and moods. Through brush, pen, and lens, each one no less than another, we possess a swift and sure means of touching the conscious and clearing the vision. I bring this up because not many people know Ansel and color. He did a tremendous amount of color photography, but we don't see much of it. He did it for commercial purposes. In those days, the photographer took the photograph and then had to mail the film into Kodak. He wasn't doing his own processing. And he, as a result of that, he didn't have the control that he didn't like. He didn't feel comfortable with it. And so he pretty much concentrated on black and white, although there is a lot of his color in the world. Now, again, these are I was lucky enough to go to Alaska with him. And this was much earlier, 1928. He went with the Sierra Club up to Jasper National Park in Canada. But part of the national park books and projects included going to places like Alaska and Hawaii. This, oops, sorry. This one has a little more importance for my wife and myself. This is a 1960 Hasselblad photograph, 2¼ that Ansel had done. And when my wife and I were to get married in 1962, we went to Ansel and said, what can we use for a wedding announcement? We looked at quite a few, and this is the one that we picked. And it's become one of the most popular of Ansel's photographs. Usually not seen in a large format, but there are some out there. But it's spectacular, and it's something special for us. The first time anything this photographer saw publication was our wedding announcement. In 1980, Ansel was awarded the Medal of Freedom. And the citation to accompany the medal reads, "At one with the power of the American landscape and renowned for the patient skill and timeless beauty of his work, photographer Ansel Adams has been visionary in his efforts to preserve this country's wild and scenic areas, both on film and on earth. Drawn to the beauty of nature's monuments, he is regarded by environmentalists as a monument himself, and by photographers as a national institution. It is through his foresight and fortitude that so much of America has been saved for future Americans." Jimmy Carter. We were introduced to the president, and we got to have lunch at the White House that day. So, pretty exciting. And then Jonathan Spaulding, in his biography of Ansel Adams, wrote, and I quote, "In August of 1985, a little over 103 years after Ansel Adams' death, a crowd of several hundred people gathered near Soda Springs in Yosemite's Tuolumne Meadows. At the same spot in the summer of 1889, John Muir and Robert Underwood Johnson had camped under the stars and planned for the meadow's protection as a national park. Now, nearly a century later, this group had gathered to celebrate the official dedication of Mount Ansel Adams and the naming of Yosemite National Park, a United Nations World Heritage Site. Among the speakers that afternoon were several of Adams' old friends. Novelist and historian Wallace Stegner defined the link between John Muir and Ansel Adams. "A place is not fully a place until it has had its poet. Yosemite and the Sierra Nevada had had two great poets, Muir and Adams. In consequence, I think that these mountains are better understood, held worthier of respect and protection than they would be if those two had never looked upon them with reverence, been delighted with spring dogwood blossoms, exhilarated by glacial pavements, dazed by half-mile cliffs, and glorified by snow peaks blossoming like roses in the dawn." This is Mount Ansel Adams. The ridgeline that's in this photograph is the border between Yosemite National Park and Sierra National Forest, which was rededicated as the Ansel Adams Wilderness a few years ago. We took the family on a pack trip to that site. It's a 2-day trip, any way you look at it. We went in on horses, but at that time. But in 1986, we put Ansel's ashes up on that ridgeline on the mountain, which we think is ultimately appropriate. And I'm going to stop at that and ask for questions. I'm very happy to stay as long as you want to answer questions, ask questions. Rachel, you?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much. This is amazing. These are such beautiful images, and to be able to hear more of the stories behind them is just amazing. So thank you. Really, really appreciate that. We do indeed already have a number of questions, but don't worry, there's still time. So if you have not typed your question into the Q&A box, I'll be keeping an eye out. let's start with an easy one, which was one of the early photos had a picture of a cake, and one of the visitors is wondering, was it someone's birthday? Do you know? Do you know?
I did-
Which
I
was,
don't, I don't remember one of a cake. Was there
I
one?
think it was the one with your mother, an early one with your mother in it.
Oh, that was their wedding.
Oh, that was their
In
wedding. Oh,
1920,
wow.
yeah, in January of 1928, that was their wedding in Yosemite in her father's studio. And that was, so that was the wedding.
Oh, that's great. And I'm also seeing the chat that people really loved the wedding announcement. And that was a great
Yeah.
wedding announcement. Another question, was Ansel self-taught? How do you learn these skills? Was he self-taught?
Yes, he really was self-taught. Like I said, he graduated from the 8th grade, but he never took any really formal schooling after that. He read voraciously, and he experimented with the photographic processes, initially with some friends who had dark rooms, people that he might have helped, a photo finisher in San Francisco near his home originally, and then later in his own dark room. But he experimented a lot, and he did a lot of research, reading about light and illumination and the electronic, I can't say electronics, but the effect of light and how it's handled and how the lenses, work, and then he had a natural eye for the image, I think,
Yeah.
what was
Given some of
comfortable
those,
for him.
given some of those early photos, it seems like that's the kind of thing you can't quite teach, is that knack for seeing composition the way that he did.
Right.
Building on that, learning about lenses and cameras. Someone was wondering what were his favorite cameras and lenses and focus lengths.
Well, his original box brownie quickly changed to more than just handheld. He had I think, a 4x5 that he could put glass plates in. He had I think a 6x8, 6.5 by 8.5 camera, which he did with glass plates. And then he sort of worked up. He had a 5x7. He had an 8x10. Now, 8x10 wasn't amenable to backpacking or traveling. He kept that in the car, and would haul it around. But much of the work he did was 8x10. As long as he could get the camera to where he was wanting to photograph. He had a 3 1/4, 4 1/4 Zeiss jewel with multiple lenses that he could carry in a backpack.
Wow.
And then in later years, he pretty much devoted himself entirely to the Hasselblad camera and all its things that it could do. Victor Hasselblad, who developed the camera, worked with Ansel, and it was wonderful for Ansel. And as he got older, that became the camera of choice. He did a lot of work with Edwin Land and the Polaroid camera, and he worked with Polaroid Corporation for years, and helped him develop a number of films. And he was excited with that.
When did he stop using glass film plates?
Well, as soon as the other film was developed, the film pack was probably the first one that he could use. But cut film, I don't know what year it came in, but I would say late 20s. So by 1930, pretty much he could use film packs or cut film and not glass plate.
Gotcha. Did he ever print any of his own color prints?
No.
No.
I
Yeah.
mentioned, He didn't have the equipment or the processing was it's too bulky, I guess, to do personally. That changed later, but
Yeah.
he didn't do any.
Did he ever crop photos, or was there a lot of post-production, or was it kind of the image that he took was the image that he kept?
Well, he cropped,
Yeah.
but also if you're enlarging a photograph, you may not enlarge the whole negative. You know, you pick
That
out
makes
the
sense.
part you like. He definitely did that, and there was a lot of manipulation of the photograph in the development to give it the brilliance and the luminance that he was looking for.
Speaking of that, there was a question about filters, that he used the red filter on many of his images, but were there other filters that he would use for effects?
Well, yeah, there's a whole series of filters available. He used the polarizing filter a great deal, but that red filter would give him the darker sky, and he liked that. But I couldn't tell you much about filters, except there are a lot of them out there.
Yeah, it's complicated. That's what I'm learning. I don't know a lot about
Yeah, it is.
photography. It's a lot.
It's
Speaking
not
of a
just
lot,
point and shoot. Yeah.
speaking of a lot, someone also wanted to know how large was his portfolio? Do you know like how many?
Oh, when he did 7 portfolios of his work. They were different sizes, and usually there were around 100 printed of one portfolio. And in the portfolio, they would range from maybe 10 to 15 images in a portfolio.
Wow. I'm going through this. There's so many good questions. One of those is, speaking of that Brownie camera, is that still in the family?
No.
No.
No,
That's
I have
too
no
bad.
idea where.
I was
And
probably well used, right, by the time he was done with it.
I suspect it was, but I think he graduated to something bigger very soon. But all of his work and his archive is at the University of Arizona in
Gotcha.
Tucson. And the Center for Creative Photography there that he helped develop is where his 40,000 negatives are parked.
Did you ever want to become a photographer too after watching?
No, I was more interested in other things, but he always was helpful. If I wanted to look at what he was taking, I could look under the ground, into the ground glass, under the focusing cloth, and he was always supportive. I helped him a little in the darkroom, but that wasn't my world.
That makes sense. Were you there when he was taking some of the photos? Did you have to make sure to stay out of?
Well, I was there when he did Moonrise, his most famous. And just quickly, we were driving back to Santa Fe, and he saw this image, and he knew that the light was going to be lost soon. We pulled across the road, and there was a big hurry, get the tripod, the camera out, and he got it set up. The interesting thing there, he couldn't find his light meter, but he derived the exposure because he knew that the luminance of the moon was 250 foot candles. And from that, he could derive his exposure. Now, that's far beyond my capabilities, but that's the way it's explained.
That must have been amazing to watch and to see all that happening in the darkroom too.
Yeah, the darkroom, that's the magic.
Yes, exactly. Did you ever suggest a setting or a place for a photograph? As
No.
No.
He knew what he wanted to get and what, basically how to get it.
What's some of the most memorable advice that your dad gave to you?
Advice?
Yeah, someone wanted to know if there's any. I think I think
Well,
interpret it however you want, either about photography or just more broadly.
that's, there's the usual advice that I think a father gives his son about, being honest and this sort of thing. But I think it was more observation and seeing and knowing what his ideals were that probably rather than having him spelled out. But I think I understood pretty much what he wanted in life and in his profession and his family life and personal life. So I don't know whether really wasn't a lot of comment. It was sort of observation and recognizing these things to be truths.
Yeah, that
That's not a good.
If your father was still working today, what type of photographer do you think he'd be? And what would you think about the shift to digital?
I think he'd be wildly enthusiastic about digital. The year before he died, he was interviewed by BBC, and they talked about electronic photography, which was really just being developed at that time. And we think that he would have loved the digital process. He would have probably jumped into it with both feet. And I truly think that it was exciting. He liked gadgets. He liked science. He liked things that were happening. And this would have been an amazing thing for him to see and play with.
Yeah. That makes sense. I could also imagine that as smaller the cameras got, the better for hiking up into some of these places, especially
Absolutely.
of carrying glass.
That was true of the Hasselblad. I mean, that became a very easy camera to use, and quality could be obtained by it. And the lenses, the different lenses it had and its capabilities gave it a great deal of versatility, and he loved it.
Let's see. We're getting some questions about the space you're in right now. Can you talk about where you're zooming in from, the gallery?
I'm speaking from, this was the house that my parents built in 1961, 62, and I'm sitting in the gallery room. And behind me on the wall is a mural of moonrise, which you can't see very well, but it's back there.
Did you have a favorite place to visit with your father? And did he have a favorite place?
Well, we loved Yosemite. No, Yosemite was probably our favorite places, both of us. I was born in Yosemite.
Oh, wow.
And I grew up there. So, gosh, it's home.
Yeah, that really the photographs, the comfort with the land and the really
It's pretty special. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite trip that you remember taking together?
Well, I don't remember that much about the Southwest trip with moonrise, but I remember very well our trip to Alaska and that photograph that I showed of Mount McKinley. That was a very special trip. And gosh, we did a number of things on that trip, but that's very memorable. It was also my first time flying, things like that. And so
Yeah.
I have a lot of memories of that, exciting memories.
Yeah, I bet flying for the first time would have been very exciting. We have a few questions about different geographic areas, noting that there aren't a lot of photos of the eastern US and wondering if there's a reason for that. And then also, was there any ever at photographs, did he ever go take photos outside the US?
The first one on the East Coast was more difficult to get to in those days. He does have a few photographs there. There's a one I showed, it might be in your museum set there, Acadia National Park on the Maine coast. You showed that barn in, I think that's in Maine. But it wasn't spectacular to him after the West Coast as far as travel. He didn't like the heat and the moisture, the humidity of the South or of Hawaii. And he did go to Europe. He went twice. My wife and I went with my mom and dad to the Arles Film Festival in 1974. That was his first time out of the US. It was hot and muggy, and that didn't appeal. He said something, I've seen all of these areas in Europe because they've been photographed so many times by so many people. It wasn't that exciting for him. And when he went back a couple of years later, he was in Scotland. I think he liked that. He did go to Zermatt and took a picture of the Matterhorn, which we like, but he just said, I've seen these places in photographs so many times. It's not like going to some unique Western thing, or thinking of Alaska, which he really fell in love with, and seeing that kind of country.
That makes sense. As a Westerner, I feel that the peaks are a little bit bigger out here, a bit more dramatic, makes for great photography. Could you, there's another question about what the average photographic trip was like. Did he always go on horseback? Would he be gone for a long time out there? And also, did he have a favorite camping meal?
Well, there were several kinds of trips. Like the trip to the Southwest was in a car. We didn't do much hiking on that. We were going to various places. He knew what he needed to get. He wanted both national parks and monuments, and then he wanted to visit some of his old friends there, and he loved the light in the Southwest. When we went to Alaska, again, it was going to national parks and monuments. That was the stimulation of going to get, to include those parks and those areas. But he was very excited about the mountains up there. The trips that I went with him several times to, like Yellowstone and Jackson Hole and the Teton National Park and Glacier National Park. So those were, he was going back to familiar country, and he loved it. In fact, when it came time to leave San Francisco in 1960-ish, he knew he was going to leave it, and he had a tough decision to make of whether to move to Carmel, where we are now, or move to Santa Fe. He and my mom loved the Southwest very much, and it was a very special place for him.
Did you spend a lot of time with people in the Pueblos?
Who? With who?
So we spent a lot of time in the Southwest.
He did. He made many trips down there. Both he and my mom.
With the Pueblo people in New Mexico?
Yeah, well, in Santa Fe and in Taos, and he had met a number of those people in these various trips that he took with the books that he was producing, and made some very good friends. And that Indian man that had the portrait from Tony Lujan from Taos, that portrait was actually taken in San Francisco, Ansel and Virginia's home. They'd come out, Mabel Dodge Lujan and Tony Lujan had come out to San Francisco to visit. But there were some good friends that he enjoyed seeing and saw relatively often. It wasn't that easy to travel in the old days as it is today, but he made many, many trips, mostly driving.
Yeah. Here's a great question. How did he feel about his fame?
Well, I think he was amazed and very appreciative of the support and the recognition that he got. I we didn't really think of him. The big change maybe be what 79 when he was made the cover of Time magazine. That was big time. He was known in the photographic world and in the environmental world, but with that Time magazine article cover, that sort of put him on the map in some ways. I know he appreciated it. I probably felt a little embarrassed about it, but he accepted it.
Yeah. And just remembered so fondly. Someone was saying that they feel that the photographs have a very spiritual tone to them, and was wondering if Ansel Adams was a spiritual man.
Well, I think if you talk to him, his spiritualness was he wanted to see these things clearly and sharply, and he would always tell you that you're not going to see this same view the way I want you to see it in my photographs. So maybe developing, enlarging, and developing a photograph with his imprint of maybe darkening the skies more, but that was maybe his spirituality as far as the picture went. But it's what he wanted you to see, and what he really liked. That's hard to say, but he said that you would never see this image the way you're seeing it in this photograph, but that's what I want you to see.
Yeah, and sharing of a vision.
Yeah.
That's great. Some questions about his music. Wondering if he continued to play piano in his life, and also did he ever publish any of his music?
As far as publishing, no. We're very fortunate. These were done as a private. Most of it done as privately on 78 records back in the 40s, and we've taken those 78 records and made, whatever they did to them to make them into as high a.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still there.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. My clock was talking to me.
Oh, gotcha.
Sorry.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Anyway, I think his music, he played the piano for friends. He didn't practice after, I would say most of my life with him, that I remember probably after 1940. He didn't practice that much. He played the piano. Somebody give him a drink and, a couple of vodkas later on and maybe get him to play a little bit. But, he became rusty. He had arthritis in the fingers and they were crooked and he wasn't hitting the keys correctly. So he didn't really want to play. He loved music. He had a large collection of CDs in his last years. And we listened, we had music to listen to.
So the love remained.
What?
So the love of the music remained, even though.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Main thing. And did you ever regretted going the photography route and not following the passion?
No, I don't think he regretted that. He decided, as I understand him talking, that he knew he wasn't going to be that exceptional musician. He would be an adequate musician. He thought most of his music would have been probably teaching or accompanying, and he felt that photography had a lot more to offer personally. And I think he's probably right.
Yeah, it seems like he made a great choice.
I think
there's some questions on the business side. People are wondering how he funded the trips and purchased the equipment? And then also, where would people buy photos? And given that there was no internet, how did he show and
Well,
sell his
yeah.
photos?
He, this was one of the wonderful things about marrying my mother, because that gallery that came into, my mother's hands that they had in Yosemite is still existing today. And this is the 120th year in business in Yosemite today. It's now known as the Ansel Adams Gallery. But once he became fairly well known, his photographs were picked up by galleries and dealers. But no, until he became sort of recognized, it was hard selling things. But he had to go the commercial route, and he took a lot of jobs over the years for various corporations, Eastman Kodak, and did a lot of photography for them or under their sponsorship. So I think it was kind of tough for a number of years. But once he became known, his photographs were in demand, as they are, and it's amazing today. The buying and selling, and especially at auctions, it's just amazing. His work is still very, very popular.
Yeah, it's amazing. We're probably not going to get to all the questions. Do you have time?
It's okay, whatever. I'm
How are
here.
you feeling?
Whatever you want me to talk about, I'm happy to.
All right, I'll pick a few more. And thank you to the audience for asking such great questions. I've been trying to scan through them all, and it's been great. Oh, someone wanted to know about the zone system and how he came up with that.
The zone system, he and a fellow named Fred Archer in Los Angeles around 1940 developed it, and I can't really tell you that much. It's a way of exposing, and if you understand it, you really understand a lot about photography. I am not really fluent in it at all, and it was one of those things that was beyond my capabilities in the early days. I just didn't understand it. But it's a very popular thing, and if you understand it, it gives you a real insight into photography, into the developing and also printing. So.
Yeah, seems to have worked well. When did the darkroom become important in his process?
The which?
The darkroom, like doing manipulation in the darkroom.
Oh, well, whenever he had a darkroom in the basement of his parents' home in San Francisco. That was his first darkroom. Prior to that, he'd worked in a photo finishing lab up the street in San Francisco, and then he worked in the darkroom that his father-in-law had in Yosemite, and later remodeled that. And then when he built the house here in 1961, he built a darkroom to his specifications, and it worked for him. But the darkroom was very important in his life, and I've known his darkroom since I was a little kid. I mean, I
bet.
knew that he was in the darkroom. And I was invited to come in and see the things, and it was fun, but I wasn't participating other than sort of watching. I did some help, but that wasn't my world.
That makes sense. Did you take a lot of documentary style images of your family, or mostly was it photography was business and then less so?
You're talking about him, his photograph?
For you as a family, like, did he take, like, when you'd go on trips, was there a lot of family photos? Did you have to pose for photos a lot?
No. There are a lot of family photos, sort of snapshot type. He did a few, tried to get us to sit still for some sort of formal ones, but we were always reluctant. He did a book about my sister and myself, and in 1940, he and my mom published Michael and Anne in Yosemite Valley, which was printed by the Studio Press in London. And when they wanted to reprint it, all the plates had been melted down to make weapons in England in 1940. That was a popular children's book at the time, but that was about the only formal book of kids. Most of the rest were really impromptu snapshots. Nothing. Now when we find them, it's kind of fun to see. And, you know, there's pictures of him with all of the babies as they came along, and later years of grandchildren and so on. But no big effort to publish anything or to formally do anything with it.
That makes sense. Did any of your other siblings take up photography?
No, I have one sister who unfortunately passed away a month or so ago.
Oh, I'm sorry to
And
hear that.
she had 3 girls, and she didn't do much in the way of photography either, except snapshots. We have a lot of family snapshots.
I bet. There's a few questions about famous people that your father might have known, including the photographic historian Beaumont Newhall.
Beaumont Newhall. They were
and
Beaumont
Georgia
Nancy
O'Keeffe.
Newhall. And
Yeah,
who?
Georgia O'Keeffe, the painter.
On Georgia O'Keeffe. Well, Beaumont and Nancy were probably some of his best friends, and he met them around 1940, and worked with Beaumont at the Museum of Modern Art. And during World War II, when Beaumont was in the military, Nancy Newhall was doing the same, working it there. And she was a wonderful writer, and she was did the writing for a number of Ansel's projects and books. And one that they did together that's never really been seen by the public, they did a book on the University of California. It was sort of the history of the University of California for the university. It wasn't in the market. It was a 4-year project, but they went around to all of the university campuses and some of the stations, research stations, and did a wonderful book on the university, but it's never been in the public eye. It was done for the university and never sold, to my knowledge, on the market. Things like that with Nancy Newhall. And she was a wonderful writer, as I said, and they collaborated on several books and projects over the years. George O'Keeffe, he met George O'Keeffe in the 30s, maybe in the late 20s. And in 37, he took a trip to the Southwest with George O'Keeffe and some others, and invited her, the same group, back to Yosemite the following year in 1938. She came to Yosemite, and they spent a 10-day pack trip into the backcountry, and they had a great time. They were friends. She came and visited a number of times. She lost her husband, I think, in 44, Alfred Stieglitz. By then she pretty much moved to Santa Fe, or to the New Mexico, but she came out and visited here. And when my wife and I were living in St. Louis, we were going back and forth to school, and my folks would always say, "Oh, please take a case of wine to Georgia." So we would make it a little effort and drop off a case of wine with George O'Keeffe in Abiquiu. We did that a couple of years. But George O'Keeffe was a fascinating lady, and he, knew her and corresponded, and they visited for many years. And actually, there's a book was published by the George O'Keeffe Museum, I believe. It was a book of Adams and O'Keeffe images, paintings, and photographs. I think it's still in print.
That's great. That's always neat to hear how creative contemporaries influenced or related to each other.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a local question. We have in the exhibit at MOHAI, there's one photo from Mount Rainier. Are there others from Mount Rainier or surrounding?
There's some, yeah, there's some of the
Mountains.
Olympics. Yeah, I know there's several of the Olympics, and I didn't mention earlier, but Ansel has a connection to your area. You know, Port Hadlock over over near Port Angeles, a little south of Port Angeles. Anyway, there's a very nice Port Hadlock has a very nice old alcohol plant, hotel, marina, what have you. That was a building built around 1900 by Ansel's father to make alcohol from sawdust. They had been in the lumbering business and had lost a lot. And anyway, to try to recoup their losses, they built this huge plant, a big cement plant. Anyway, it went out of business, and Ansel showed it to me in probably 1947, I guess. We've kept up with it, and all of a sudden we took our kids there and we drove in, and by golly, here was a hotel. It's now called the Old Alcohol Plant, using the same alcohol plant structure, the big concrete building. They made a hotel, there's a restaurant, and it's very nice. We've been there several times, and it's not that far from where you are, except it's near Port Ludlow and Port Hadlock, Port Angeles, and Port Townsend. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's over on that side, and they're still functioning, and they're using the Ansel Adams history of plant being owned by Ansel's family and making alcohol from sawdust.
Wow.
It didn't last very long, but Ansel, as a kid, used to go up there with his father. So anyway, that's a local connection.
Thank you. So I know it's getting a little late, so we're not going to be able to get to all the questions, but before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to add? Any stories you want to leave us with?
No, and I want to thank you. I'm very happy to do this, and I would love to see the show that you have up, but I don't think it's going to work this time.
Well, hopefully.
But, congratulations, and happy to help.
Yes, thank you. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for speaking with us tonight. It's really great. Thank you to everyone who came.
Most pleasure.
Put a survey link in the chat. So before you leave, if you could click on that to help us learn more about your thoughts on this evening, that'll be in the chat. Also, we encourage everyone to come visit the exhibit at MOHAI. Ansel Adams Masterworks will be up until September 5th. So please come by and see that. We also have a companion an exhibit that is also looking at photography and thinking about nature. The community curators drawing from both MOHAI's collection and the Black Heritage Society of Washington State's collection, Perspectives on Place, and that will also be up till September 5th. So come to MOHAI, see both those exhibits. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have a curators talk. The community curators who did Perspectives on Place will be speaking on July 7th in the evening. So check out our website. We'll also put the link in the chat for that. And finally, if you learned something new or enjoy the work we do, please consider making a donation and becoming a member to help us sustain the museum through the impact of the pandemic. We so appreciate all your support and all of you for being here. And thank you again. And thank you again, Michael Adams. Really appreciate everything you had to share today. This was wonderful.
Most welcome. And please say hello to Curtis and Ann Wong, who I think will do on this. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your evening.